Okay, so I think we will start getting started. I'm Tito. I would like to acknowledge that we're on the traditional lands of the Narrawong, the Boon Wurrung, the Wadjarri Wurrung people of the Kulin Nation. And I would like to acknowledge elders past and present and emerging, and to acknowledge their continuing custodianship of the land and acknowledge that sovereignty has never been ceded. Welcome to Lessons from the Trenches, live ops and game data architecture. So today we're having a conversation between 4 developers from 4 very different backgrounds, but we've all worked in live ops from one aspect or another. So what I'm going to do is let everyone introduce themselves. I'm Tito. I work at Tantalus North. We've just been announced, so it's all really exciting. I've been in the games industry for a bit over around about a decade now-ish, give or take. Mainly worked in the mobile and free-to-play space, so worked in live ops, both server engineering and client engineering in that space. I live and work on the land of the Turrbal and the Jaggeras people up in Brisbane.
Cool. My name is Josh Caratelli. I live and work on the land of the Darug people up in Sydney. I have a number of years' experience as well. My live ops experience comes from Sledgehammer Games. I was one of the original engineers. We grew the team from 6 to about 150 or something now it is. I recently moved on though. I'm at Gravity Well Games. And for those who don't know who Gravity Well is, all the people who used to make Call of Duty years ago left and made Respawn. They left again and made something new, and that's where I'm at the moment. So it's a very, very lovely team, and I'm going to bring my live ops experience to bear there as well. In terms of specific work, mostly engine stuff, but for a year I did live ops on Call of Duty World War II, and I actually gave a GCAP presentation back in 2019 about that, for more technical stuff about that as well. It's on YouTube. Pass it to Tony.
I'm Tony Albrecht. I am a principal engineer at Riot Games. I've been there for about 8 years. Been in the industry for 20-something years now. I actually got my first job at the first Australian Games Conference back in '99. So, yeah, I love this conference. I do mainly engine work for Riot with League and Teamfight Tactics. Did a little bit of server work for Valorant. But my live ops stuff is kind of producing the data and allowing our teams to be able to catch problems as they go live. So.
I'm Bernie, or Bernard Ockerse, and I'm an embedded QA lead at Sledgehammer Games. I have not been in the gaming industry for very long, less than 2 years. Before that, I worked at Intel doing enterprise QA for the visual programming lab in Europe. And yeah, I have live ops experience. Well, was one, and that was the launch of Vanguard. But I feel like that was enough. So yeah, that's me.
Excellent, excellent. So what I'm going to do is I reached out on social media and asked a bunch of people if they had any questions for this amazing panel here. So I've got a bunch of questions I've got a bunch of questions that we kind of sort of talked about, things that we're really interested in. And then what I want to do is at the end open up to the floor. And so if you have some burning kind of questions after all of our discussions, then we'll open it up to you after that. So our first questions is, what factors do you need to weigh when you're making this decision to kind of go about live ops in your game? Sort of what model, what things do you need to think about?
Yeah, I might kick things off. So I think it's really important to always take live ops from day one. So as much as people say, if you're marketing from day one, live ops has to be, if not the second thought, the third thought at the very least, right? You need to, you can't plan for a multiplayer game halfway through development, you need to start planning for live ops straight away. Even doing things such as, when you're dealing with live ops, you need to either mitigate or solve an issue. So how are you going to plan to do that? Are you putting things on console variables so you can flick on and off in the live environment? Are you doing things such as reporting, and how do you know stuff's broken? Fun fact, I used to use Reddit to find out Call of Duty was broken because it was quicker to find out than our internal reporting tools for quite a while, by about 2 minutes. And we're dealing with the scale of certain games, 2 minutes can affect a lot of players. People can bounce from that. So my big thing is always planning early for either risk mitigation or solving stuff.
Yeah. I'll definitely agree with that. And also making those decisions up front. So one of the things that I sort of talk about when you're looking at live ops what model of live ops you need depends very much on the style of game you're making. The live ops you need for sort of a free-to-play title is very different from something with the Call of Duty title. They're very different models, and how fast you need to respond to things, how fast you can respond to things, and how you set up. So, for instance, one of the things in free-to-play is you need to do it really fast. You need to respond really fast. So having a system set up that you can upload a 2 kilobyte flag file that says, we are just flagging off this feature because it is killing everyone right now. Flag it off, and then we can fix it and put an announcement on all the forums and those sorts of things. But having that set up early and having features created on the development side with those things in mind from the outset is really important.
Yeah, I think it's a key point. Making sure that you're aware of risky code or data and preparing for that to go bad, because when you're dealing with a lot of players, if anything can go wrong, it will go wrong.
Oh, yeah.
And it will explode.
Spectacularly.
Yeah.
Test early, test often, that's what we live by, especially before you're in that live ops scenario. If you can start testing as close to a prod or as close to a production environment as possible. It can be difficult getting those high player counts and stuff. You need to come up with creative ways to get that. But if you can test, it's impossible to test exhaustively, but if you can test as much as possible and work out those pain points or where you think those issues are going to be that could cause issues, and even testing stuff like the kill switches and that, because it's cool to have the list and somebody's put them all in or says they've put them all in, something happens, you hit the kill switch, it doesn't work, excellent.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I've even worked on games where the kill switches actually broke more things. So it's really, really, really important. It's like the old Toy Story 2 thing where they never test the backup tapes. So always test the backups as well. And a quick thing that Bernie mentioned about testing early. So I used to work with Bernie at Sledgehammer Games, and he's part of embedded QA, where QA are actually part of the engineering pods based on different disciplines and however you want to slice it. And it's really important. I think it's a great strategy to actually have QA testing the changes before they're submitted. Well early. You have all the pre-submits and everything as well, but it's one way to test by submitting and go through the usual QA passes, but being able to have someone to unshelve the check-in I'm about to do and then exhaustively run it in different ways I haven't thought of, excellent. So
yeah, having qualified QA, iterating together with your devs and engineers at every step, I think is, especially the larger the game, the more complex, the more critical it becomes.
Yeah.
Instead of just an afterthought, you shove it out the door and there's a team of QA sitting somewhere that just hammer away at it. It's never good enough. They'll always miss something.
Mm-hmm.
And there's always going to be something that breaks.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, especially with my code.
And that's the thing as well is when something does slip through QA and hits live and goes wrong, being able to roll back in a test to add to the suite to make sure that doesn't happen again, because you're not going to catch everything. There's too many things that can go wrong. So being prepared for that, and being able to iterate.
I've come to peace with the idea that you can't catch everything.
Yeah.
It took me years, actually.
So next question, if someone, one of our developers here, has only kind of developed single player offline things, what are the most important things do you think that they need to kind of learn to change about their process if they want to start moving into this space? And are there any sort of things about particular skill sets or team sizes that you'd recommend kind of to go forward with?
It depends, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's about it.
The perfect senior engineer answer ever. It depends.
I'm not committing to anything.
I'm gonna flag a couple of things. So the first one I want to flag is have at least more than one person. I would say more than two people who can do your midnight calls, because you want to be able to have time off. So usually what you do is you have your first on-call who gets the alert when the AWS server goes, oh my God, I'm going to die. And then you have a fallback person, and you want more than two people, because you want to be able to have someone who can go on holiday, and then it's not always that one person on call. So you need at least sort of 3 people so you can rotate through the on-call for your live ops. Having only one person means they're always on, and they'll get burnt out real quick. Yeah. So you want to make sure you have at least a few people who, even if it's only they know enough to stop the fire. They can't fix it, but they can, whether it's the switch they can turn off or whether it's they can just scale up the serve. They have the basic things to kind of hit those fires at 4 o'clock in the morning when something goes horribly wrong.
And they only go wrong at 4 in the morning.
Oh, they only go wrong at 4 in the morning. and then you have a blackout while you're trying to run it. And so I'm getting my laptop out and running through my cellular data trying to get the server scaling up at 4 o'clock in the morning because that is when they do that. So I'd say that's one thing with team size to think about is make sure you have that redundancy in who is monitoring you, who is your on-call for your live ops. And having an on-call system is really important, having an alert system that can go, hey, because particularly in Australia, you know, our peak usage may not be when we're awake. So, you know, whether it's US, whether it's Europe time, whether it's wherever it is, that you may have a bunch of players in countries totally on the other side of the world from you. So if you have your peak usage there, it was great sometimes so you can start doing your rollout. And now in Australian time zone, when your players are low, you can check things and then it ramps up. And so you kind of, at least I like that, it gives you a bit more stability. But just be aware that your peak player time might not be when you're awake. And so having those rollouts is really, really important.
Yeah.
Just to give you an idea of scale, for being on call with Riot, we have a primary on call, a secondary on call, and then to a senior manager, and then to the boss. So they don't drop through. But we also have, that's per, like we'll have, engine team on call for, or game engineering, and then there might be gameplay, and also other types of infrastructure. We have network operations centres that are region-based that also capture these things in the first place and will flag them to individual teams. And so, all the engineers are on call. It's about every few weeks, 6 weeks, I think, tops, for a few days at a time. So that's kind of rotated through. So you're not getting those 4 a.m. calls all the time.
Yep.
But and also the important thing about rolling out different regions, like we will roll out new patches to Oceania first because it's a smaller user base. So you can see when things are going wrong. If things catch on fire, you can put them out there rather than blowing up Korea or North America. So
That's literally, words out of my mouth. Even on that too, one benefit of being Australian developers is those time zones as well. Rolling out patches, updates, etc. Through through those time zones and also on that point, don't always just roll it out through Australian time zones. If you find out most of your players are in Australia, then do it in a different time zone. Like just really work to. Long story short, it depends.
told you.
So one of the things that we got, which I think is an interesting question, what techniques can you use to help prevent content leaking through early data mining? Got some curly ones.
Obfuscation.
Yeah.
That's all I could think of.
My big thing with that, for someone who works, so I'm an engine programmer by trade who decided to volunteer for live ops. Never volunteer for live ops. But the big thing we discovered, I've discovered across several games, whether it's a AAA or an indie or whatever, is as much as you try and obfuscate it, as much as you try and hide it when it's in the game, people are very smart and it's amazing how they do it.
They have more time and energy to dedicate to it than you have to protect from
Absolutely. So you need to really at the pipeline stage flag assets for different content releases. So if you are not releasing whatever DLC, MTX, whatever for a certain number of months, you need to have it available in development, and then when you actually go to build the final package, it has different sort of content gates. And it goes, this is not due for this content gate, so I won't get it in there, et cetera, et cetera. The issue with that is that does cause weird issues when all of a sudden it works in dev and not in production. But at the same time, I still think that's a better issue to have, unless you really don't care about people finding out about stuff early, which if that's an option, then that would be so good.
And that's one of the things sometimes in the free-to-play space, you're like, well, we actually don't mind so much. Our resources are so thin on the ground in that. So if they're, as long as it doesn't affect our sales and our, monetization, we don't have the resources because we're dealing with 0.5 cents per user or something. We don't have enough of the resources to invest in making it fully 100% obfuscated where no one can get anything at it. And to be honest, they mine it, so they put it up on the forums and document it better than we do. So we're like, cool, we'll use that.
Leaking some stuff can trigger some excitement about the product as well.
Yeah.
Because people's imagination is always better than what you actually ship. So.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm not shipping that, no.
But yeah, I mean, like with League, we're very careful about what data actually goes out.
Yeah.
Stuff does slip through occasionally, and you find about it instantly as someone's ripped it apart. Okay, this is the new stuff that's come out. It's amazing what players will do.
Yeah.
I mean, if it's on the client or in transit, people will get at it.
Yep.
Like that's the basic rule. Whenever I'm dealing with someone who's building stuff like that, it's like, if it's on the client or if it's in transit, don't trust it.
Yeah.
Because they will have ripped it up, they will fiddle with it, they will have, the only thing that you can kind of mostly be certain of is your server space, but even then, sometimes.
Yeah.
But mostly, it's the mostly okay one. But don't trust anything that's coming to you because it could have been fiddled in transit. A lot of tools like Fiddler out there where people kind of mess with it. One of the games that I was working on, we kept getting requests for 9972446 something coins. We're like, why? Oh, it's someone's shifted a byte, and that's the number that came when they shifted it. That's the number that it came up with. So we blocked that, and that was fine. But that was the thing. They filled it in transit. So if it's in transit on the client, it'll be hacked.
Yeah. So if you are using strings on the client, you shouldn't be.
Yes. Thank you.
So there's a lot better ways of doing things, even hashes and stuff. So it gives you space and performance benefits. But yeah, strings will be extracted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And even like you can try and obfuscate strings as much as you want, but they will be extracted. So like hash tables, as Tony said as well. You can even do like pre-build steps in Visual Studio and stuff to do like struct shuffling and stuff. A lot of studios do that. If you're not doing that, it's not easy to set up, but once it's set up, it's relatively painless in comparison to not obfuscating stuff in the future. So struct shuffling is a really good thing to do as well. So yeah.
And I mean, one of the challenges that often, in the free-to-play space that you're kind of balancing here is often we will want to do quick updates, and we can't necessarily do a full update because say if you're doing mobile space, the approval process takes a month. So we need a technique to live ops releases and packages releases and bundle releases online so we can continually keep that content moving. And so you have to also have systems for that. So again, this is where a lot of those depends comes in. Where you're doing it, how you're doing it, what platforms you're doing it, what control do you have? So if you're releasing to a proprietary platform, you have less control. But if you own sort of the platform, you have a lot more control.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yes.
Yes.
Okay. So the next one is, given we got QA here, this is going to be for you. What techniques can you use to help promote stability and reduce bugs over the life of a long-lived live service title?
I think you'd have to start then at the very beginning, like meeting up with the producers, the designers, and going, what exactly is our expected outcome from this feature, this tech? Like if you start right at the beginning, if QA, production, the designers, the engineers are all on one page, if you have your use cases, if you have your test cases, if everybody's iterating together, we like to use like agile teams, using Scrum or Kanban or something like that. Everybody's on the same page, and like our motto is quality is everybody's responsibility. And if you go into it, I think, with that sort of mindset, then that stability is kind of already inbuilt. That team is already kind of set up for stability. You ideally and in theory, you should have less bugs because there's less chances of a bug because everybody's iterating together. QA are testing as they're pushing up builds, as small stuff is being done. I think that would be it. Ideally, it's great. I know I sit here and I'm like, and we do all of this and we do all of that. The theory of it is great. In practice, especially when you get towards like the crunchier sides of the project, and things maybe start to fall apart a little bit, I find it's good just to take that step back and be like, what were we originally doing? Like, what is that expected outcome for the user? And then kind of be like, okay, that's what we still need. Let's go back. Let's concentrate on that. Let's not lose the plot with everything that's happening over here. So, yeah, it gets tricky.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
One of the things for me that's really important, because I'm an engineer and this is the stuff that I do. Data validation. So game data validation for those sorts of things. If you can automate some of those things so that QA is not logging and go, oh, you're missing the model for this thing. If you can do a run through on your game data, on your things that kind of flags, hey, this asset is, whether it's you're doing things about naming conventions,
Yep.
whether you're doing things, because some games rely on naming convention covers, if you're doing things on, also avoid having artists and designers having to manually script things, and if you do, have proper validation on it. You don't want to be having your whole build broken at 4 o'clock in the morning because of a missing triangle bracket in HTML. Not that I've had to do that or anything. So having good data validation is really important, and that will save your ass in the long run.
Enforcing that as well, telling
Yep.
people like you have to do your pre-submits or your manual builds or whatever you're using, like,
Put in your build pipeline.
Yeah.
you have to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Even on top of that too, in terms of processes as well, are really important because, again, live ops, you're constantly reacting to things that are changing, and again, it depends. It's seat of your pants sort of material that you're going with. Having good processes is really important. So everything you do with a live environment should be buddy checked by someone, and not the buddy is beer, because that does not count.
Friday afternoon, see ya.
Yeah, that does not count, or whatever, or soda, or whatever your poison of choices. So proper processes as well, making sure. And my biggest thing that saved me several times is not saying, like press enter to continue. It's like type in yes, or type in commit, or type in whatever to make sure you actually doing what you intend to be doing. And then on the QA side too, having the ability to have different online environments. Effectively, you can just test this online environment and then just change it to the production, like swap them over is great. Also, the ability to do any allow listing or whitelisting to actually check your fast patching process has fixed a certain UI bug. Okay, in the retail copy of the game, see it works, and only give it to certain users who happen to be QA. And then also you can do like A/B testing with that as well, which is very cool. But that's an entirely separate topic. But yeah.
Yeah, I think hardening of the pipeline is important. So making it so it's impossible to do the wrong thing, if you can. Because mistakes are easy to make. Just ensuring that they can't happen as they do happen.
Yeah, and particularly the easy stuff. Like if you can mitigate, our jobs are hard enough. Let's not have to deal with the easy bugs or the easy issues that we just don't have to.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is, I think, probably on the sort of engine-y side of things. How do you make the choices between what you put on the server versus what you put on the client, and how you kind of make those decisions about how you set things up to do that, and then the links between the two?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Basically, if you want a player to know about something, put it on the client. If you don't want to know about it, keep it on the server. With League, anybody that's in the fog of war, that data is not sent from the server to the client. So the client does not know anything about it because it's just too easy to hack that data. No matter how much obfuscation you have, how careful you are, they will figure it out. Yeah. So do not send anything to the client that the client does not need to know about. Yes.
No, seriously, it's amazing how many times you find whether it's somebody who hasn't done multiplayer development before, and they go, I can send this across, or I can use a string for this or whatever. It really, it needs to be, like stress what Tony said, that it needs to stay on the server and not be sent to the client. Then you have the edge cases where it's like, oh, but the client needs to know. It's like, well, then do client prediction, but they won't know the exact position or won't know the exact state something is in. And also you need to do that because latency exists. You can't be the speed of light, right? So you need to have some sort of client prediction as well. But too often do I see, I sort of help do technical consulting for indie games to do multiplayer. And too often do I see towards the end, it's like, oh, this doesn't work, we'll just do it on the client. And then towards the end of development, towards when the game comes out, it's far too late to change that. And there's 10,000 fires to put out, blah, 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 blah. And sometimes it's not even a case of then willingly knowing that we're sending this to the client. It's just that have the code buddy checked. You go, oh, actually, that's available to the client. Stuff like that. So it's really important to do that as well. And also try and break your game. If you're a smaller team, try and break your game and see what can happen. I don't know if argue if you're a smaller team and you have the ability to do it, find someone on some forum somewhere who loves breaking games and ask them, could you please break our game? And we'll give you whatever X amount of payment it is. Because I reckon whatever you pay them is a lot less than what's going to cost you later.
And in that, once it is out, things like Reddit, things like when you're an indie team, they're great. Like one of the games that I worked on was for a bigger company. The amazing bot that one of these hackers made to work against it. Beautiful code. Like I wanted you to send me, look, thank you very much for making really nicely written, well-documented code. I fixed it all, and so you can't work anymore. But it was beautiful. It was a beautiful tool. Thank you very much. And sorry I've broken it all. But yeah, getting familiar with some of those areas of the hacker forums, the fan forums, where they kind of exploit forums, because you don't necessarily, as an indie team, have the time or the resources to do some of that stuff. So the internet is there. Those forums are there. You can sit there and look. Like, any of those forums, you'll have the developers of the game sitting there kind of looking, going, release came out, what have they found?
If you just post, can you break my game?
Yeah.
Oh, challenge accepted. Like 100%.
They will break a game.
Yeah, they will. 100%.
Yeah, definitely not in the live ops sort of area. But like a perfect example is, not like breaking for anyone else, but who knew you could speedrun Goose Game, right? Like Untitled Goose Game, you can absolutely speedrun, and there's a very, prolific YouTuber who did that, who completed the game in a minute because they found all these wonderful ways to break it. Now imagine that on a multiplayer game where, they just bought the game, put a bunch of money in it, and they can't play because someone's hacking.
Mm-hmm. And that's the other side of this stuff. Like one of the things is, in, say, something like League, being more aware of that is a much bigger thing. Whereas for a free-to-play game where the really only thing that exposure you have to other users is a leaderboard, you can. That's a lot easier to either fudge or work around than something like that where your competition is your game.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, it did definitely. Something like Valorant or Counter-Strike, where you got all different types of hacks that give you a ridiculous advantage. Players don't like that. Well, the players that are doing it like it, but nobody else likes it.
Yeah.
Testing different network conditions, I just thought. Like
Perfect.
Oh, yeah.
We had, that was a big wake-up call for me when I realized that everybody different people in different geographic locations have different internet speeds, like wildly different internet speeds. Like, and then we would do certain things and we would wonder why we weren't getting the results we expected, and we had to go back and we literally had to start testing different types of networking that people would have at home.
Yeah.
Like, what happens if you have, it suddenly drops to 10 kb or something, or 50 kb?
Yeah.
How do you?
Yeah, so my very fun story. I'm also really glad I did a live ops talk in COD years ago here, because I know I can actually say and can't say. So one of the stories I mentioned back in that previous talk was in Call of Duty there's a fast patching process, as many games have. And speaking of internet speeds, unfortunately I can't remember the name of the country. I think it was Cambodia, but I'm not entirely sure. Please watch the talk, let me know. But the fast patching process had a certain timeout. So everyone from that particular country couldn't play the game because the average internet speed wouldn't download the 5 megabyte update within a certain amount of time, which meant that, we had, X thousands of players who couldn't play the game for a certain period of time because we never tested it with lower network conditions.
Similar to that, different CPUs, GPUs, physical memory available, even hard drive speeds vary dramatically across regions.
Xbox, the differences between an SSD and a platter on save games in a...
Oh, yes. Can I talk about that?
Things can,
Yeah.
So, another one here, and I don't know who'd be interested in this one, but how early in the development process do you need to commit to a specific server infrastructure? And if you need to upgrade or change, what pain points might you find? So I might answer this one. So if you're working on an indie space, I've used things like Docker, tools like that, where you can kind of make contained server instances, which allow you to kind of migrate a bit easier. I've found that if so one of the things that you find is there are companies that provide a lot of tools for you to do your server stuff. And that's great. If you don't have a lot of experience, it's great. But, and this is the but, often it's really hard to move away from them. So, your embedded leaderboards your entire infrastructure is set up with them, and so you can't move. And so if you find that maybe your game wasn't as financially successful as you want, or maybe they raise the price of the subscription, which suddenly makes your game not viable, you might have to either work out a way around that. And so that's one of the things to think about when you're starting out is, do you need to really think about that? Is the cost-benefit ratio for being locked into a particular technology, kind of something that you can really focus on, or maybe having something like a virtual machine with a Docker instance that you can kind of spin up much more easily in different environments and different regions and zones, because that's another thing that in live ops is really important, is making sure that if you may need to spin up servers in different locations. So, you don't want a huge latency between, like one of the games I worked on, they used USA East Zone 1, which is fine, except if you're in Australia. Suddenly trying to get anything from there, the validation for your user login, all of that stuff was just that much longer, to the point where I'm like, even I want to close the game, and I'm working on it. So then we could kind of spin up another server over this side of the Oceania, and it made a much quicker and much better experience. So having that set up, being able to do that, was really important for us. So, but on the flip side, some of those services that do provide it all built in for you do already have it set up all around the world in different regions. So one of the things to think about is all of those, it's a lot of business stuff to think about in terms of cost-benefit ratio, again, free to play versus things, also volume of traffic. So a lot of these services do it on volume. So if you were expected for a really high volume of players, but a low return on each player, then maybe it's not as financially viable. But if you're looking at a high volume pair with everyone playing a premium title up front, maybe it's not so much of a big deal. So this is one of those things where a lot of the business and design decisions actually dramatically affect some of those core technical decisions that you have to make. Because sometimes you can get away with, so one of the games that I worked on, the leaderboards, yeah, well, look, we had to make them cheap. Everyone loved the leaderboards, everyone liked them being cheap, but we had a very low return on users, so we needed the infrastructure to be really cheap. So we had the first 100,000 players would go into the leaderboards. They'd each have a doc, basically a thing, put the 100, they just randomly selected in terms of we had about 100, so we had 1,000 of them because we had 100,000, and so kind of blocked it into the players. And so each document had about 100. And then any extra player on that would be randomly selected a leaderboard, and on their device it would show them where they are amongst all those other players, but they were never written up to the server. So you only ever had those group of people writing, because that was the expensive cost for us, writing to the server, but you had a lot of reads, which is the cheap bit. And so everyone got the experience of a leaderboard, everyone had that, but it was really cheap to run, and we had a really low cost. So in that game, we were dealing with millions of active users, so we needed it to be cheap because, again, they were 0.5 cents or 5 cents a user. So it's that cost balance. They got the experience of a leaderboard, but it was also cheap to run. So again, sometimes in this live ops space, a little bit, you have to do a bit of smoke and mirrors to try and, so they get the experience that they want, also hid the hackers. So, you're less likely to, if one day, because it was a daily leaderboard, you got someone with a 9999 kind of thing, you wouldn't be on the same leaderboard with them. They had to get in that first run. So they had to be in the first run. They had to, have, gotten to the same leaderboard as someone. So the odds of seeing that person ever again was really, really low. So the impact on the broader player base of those hackers was really small. So it actually made it a lot better for the actual player experience as well.
Can't believe you hid my score. Ridiculous.
Something you kind of touched on there with different server setups and whatnot. Similarly, your data reporting out, you want to kind of abstract that a bit because your network people and your data scientists, they like the latest, greatest thing. And in my experience, it changes the way you report, and you're going through different APIs all the time. So if you can abstract that away, so you have, from the game side, a clear API that's pretty generic, and then underneath you can do whatever the hell you like. And so that when things change, you just change that. It's going to benefit you in the long run.
Oh, definitely. I mean, the number of times I had to port from this tool to that tool because they're like, oh, but this one gives me all these other things. Cool.
Yeah, and then you port it, and then this one's got even more things.
Yeah. That's why I don't do web, right? Because there's a new framework every 6 months, and then someone would, we use the web to track analytics. And it's like, okay. So, yeah.
Okay, so live service infrastructure, if we start thinking about how we're building stuff and how we're supporting it, what do you think, as maybe over time your costs increase, whether it's per volume or per, particularly if you've got a premium up front and you're not kind of earning money continually off someone, what sort of percentage do you think, when you think about this, is good for a percentage of total budget? Like how much do you think is a good thing to think about? I mean, I know this is kind of going on the business side, but it's one of the questions that kind of came through. And are there any, particularly on our side, are there any tips and tricks that you have for reducing one? So I've kind of touched on that, but...
Yeah, build your own internet.
That'll do it.
Yeah. No, I know nothing about costing and stuff. I'm just a mere programmer.
Yep.
So in terms of reducing costs, I think your most expensive thing always will be your people, because they're bloody good at their job, and as a result, they should be paid well. If you're not, pay them more, please. So I think the big thing is making sure you share the knowledge with everyone else. We're talking about, I'm not sure we actually mentioned it before, but like the bus test, right? Like if someone goes out because they're sick or having a vacation or whatever, do you have someone else that can cover their role? And not even cover that role, it's you really want to have that knowledge spread out across the entire team. So the amount of times I've seen across several teams where something has gone wrong and a particular person wasn't available, or due to a myriad of different reasons, it doesn't actually matter.
Or they were hospitalised because their spine exploded and suddenly they weren't there.
Shit. Okay, yeah.
Very specific.
It happens. That's it. Sometimes the bus actually happens.
Yeah.
Case in point, right? Exactly. And you think about, you talk about burn rate in teams, right? It's 10 grand per head per month. Probably more with inflation now. Sorry, but you talk about the burn rate with teams, and you think about what's the burn rate in terms of how much it costs not to have the game functioning, not have the ability for a player to interact with the game, and however you monetize that, for better or worse. So by making sure you actually spread the information out across the team, so A, everyone's less stressed, it's not all dumped on one person, and B, players can enjoy the game they're actually either paying for or putting time into, because I think spreading the knowledge out is probably like the best way to reduce costs, because otherwise it gets into it depends territory, depends on your game, your team and everything else.
Yeah, I think it definitely depends on the scale of the game.
Absolutely, yeah.
If you're looking at 100,000 users compared to 100 million users, where your cost is very different. And also, if you have 100 million users, then you've got more bargaining power as well with some of the providers.
And I mean, one of the things we talked about earlier was documentation. For instance, I have what I call a scratch sheet where I write stuff out and then I turn it into documentation of things that I do once a month that I don't remember, because next time I go, wait, how did I do that thing again? That is also really good in terms of that people cost. Having that up, I know that people kind of go, oh, but it takes so much time to write it. It takes a hell of a lot longer to not have it.
Yep.
If every month you go, wait, how did I do that thing again? Or they update a platform and there's this weird little thing that you have to do because they've changed this bit on the thing. You need to click that thing, otherwise it's better just to have it documented and have all those steps laid out, and then as new things happen, you update it. Maintain it. So every time you're going through this, and then if again I get hit by a bus or someone else gets hit by a bus, the documentation is there that they can go, okay, wait, I've done this like a month ago or 2 months ago or maybe 6 months ago. I remember there was this thing. Oh, wait, I can go to the documentation. So that, documentation will save you money in the long run, particularly for live ops.
Yeah, and just a quick note on that too. Making it easy to document stuff is really important. One of the best things I ever did at Sledgehammer, besides opening the window and cooling the office down by 5 degrees, seriously, top 3 things I did there, but is I wrote a Slack bot framework that would turn Slack threads into Jiras. And the Jira, realistically, you want this to turn into Confluence pages too, but it was great for someone to go, ooh, we should write that down, and someone goes, yeah, we should write that down, and then the conversation disappears magically, and a month later, what's that thing we had to do a month ago? I don't remember. So having a really easy way to document things, whether it's a scratch pad or a Slackbot framework or whatever, just somewhere visible that everybody can see it, and it just annoys the hell out of people. Even setting up some sort of bot to automatically remind people, hey, have you updated the live ops kill switches? Have you done this? Even just sending out a regular email going, hey, if you're new, we have XYZ processes. It's,
Excellent.
important.
Okay, so now, fun one. If you're running a competitive game, what techniques do you recommend to manage back-end data and anti-cheating measures?
Anti-cheat. Okay. Anti-cheat's a big one. It's like we change our basic network encryption every 2 weeks. We have an entire multiple anti-cheat teams whose job it is to help us to reduce hacking of the client, as well as catch network intrusion, DDoS stuff. We've got stuff in hardware that does that as well. There's a vast amount of work that goes into ensuring that it's harder to cheat. It still happens.
Oh, yeah.
And we just put everything we can possibly do, we do. I mean, I don't know, I did a little bit of work on Valorant, but I mean, that's even like hypervisor level security built into it so that we can catch these people earlier on.
One of the things that I do is aim to reduce what's in traffic. So, if you're dealing with a game that's heavily reliant on game data, for instance, things like RTSs and those sorts of things, and if you're doing, just on a basic level, if you're doing things like a transaction, they've bought a thing, don't send a thing say they've bought 300 coins, because they will fiddle with the traffic and they'll give it to 3,000, and that's just the way it works, or million. Make sure, so one of the things you do is you can send keys. If you have a key that matches something on the server, so a data key, for instance, hash and salt it, and then if they fiddle with it, it just gets dehashed as a key that's invalid. So they go, oh, there's an error here. Sorry, retry that. Because you're not sending a coins colon one. No,
JSON.
no, don't send that. Don't send it raw. Basically, things like reducing it. So just sending hashed and salted keys that the server understands and the client understands. But if they fiddle with it,
Yeah,
it
and
just
rotating those salts
and
as well.
Absolutely.
Yep.
I think Optus should have had a chat with us before.
There's pain.
There's pain.
Okay.
Yeah, too soon.
So what I want to do now is open it up to the floor. If anyone has any questions, sort of about live ops, about any of these sorts of live ops type things, chuck up your hand, and we're happy to ask.
Mike at the front as well. Yeah.
Oh, we'll can I grab our amazing volunteer? Thank you again to the volunteer.
If it'll work,
to do the.
is it working?
Yep.
Yes. Yeah.
It is. Okay, cool.
Cool. And also heckles are welcome too. But yeah, just jump up
So
the front.
come up to the mic, and if you can, that cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, if you want to come up to the mic.
Also, if you want to form like a queue with a bit of spacing because of COVID as well, like that's more.
Feel free, yeah.
Feel free to do that as well. I mean, everyone's crammed in at the moment, so.
Excuse me, a mask. Hey, my name's Alex. Thanks for coming and doing a panel for us. I wanted to ask specifically for our more global games with really big player base, so talking more in the Valorant League sort of space. When you talk about having multiple teams on anti-cheat and rotating your roster of your on-call staff, do you tend to have a physical location that they all live at and then rotate on a time zone, or do you find it best to actually hire people local to different regions or time zones?
Yes. Definitely. We have people in different regions. They're responsible for local network operations. The different games themselves actually have different types of anti-cheat, so they're actually completely independent. There is some movement towards coalescing that into a single solution, but the games are so wildly different that there's no real way of doing that. And again, the teams are completely disparate, so the rotation for your on-call duties are totally independent. Most of the like engineers in particular aren't scattered throughout Brazil and Russia and everywhere else. We do have different teams in different places, but most of our engineering work happens based out of LA. So we're on call, and we actually acknowledge in I think it's a bi-weekly meetup those people who've been called out after midnight, because it's a pain in the ass when that happens, but acknowledging that they've done this, once or twice is important, But yeah, so we don't have. Also, they kind of tend to ignore the time zones. So sometimes I'll be on call and LA will come online. It'll be 9 a.m. for them, and it's like, oh my god, there's a problem. We'll page, and it's like 2 a.m. for me.
It's got to get done. It's got to get done.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I used when I was working at a company in the US is I basically said, hey, can I travel back home for a bit and work remotely? So I was working on an alternate time to then. So one day I was working out and suddenly I see the game just go this flat line. And I'm on there, and luckily, because they were asleep, I could catch it there. So sometimes if you are traveling and working, say, hey, can I work from the office over here? So I could work from the office in Australia, or I could work from the office over here. And so that allowed me to do some of that travel and work, and then on my evenings go out and catch up with people.
Yeah. I think with, as much as, everything's sucked working from home, not being able to, have stuff like this in in-person events, the pandemic has really opened Pandora's box for remote working. So now, at least where I work, there's plenty of people in different time zones as a result that, can tackle problems at different times. I think it's really important you make sure all the training happens together, whether you fly them in just for like a social meet and greet as well, or you just have regular training between different time zones about how to escalate and handle all that as well. But in terms of the original question of do people hide in different time zones for live ops? In an ideal world, yes. But it's really bloody hard to hire talent, and you kind of get them where they are these days, especially too. So it kind of happens organically as well. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, great question. Thank you.
You had another one? Yep.
Yeah, correct.
I was wondering how big a role automated testing plays in your pipelines, and if any, how deep into gameplay code you go, or if you're just testing high-level connections and purchases and stuff like that.
Well, from my point of view, our automated testing is fairly high level. We have a combinatorial explosion of champions that can have impacts on other champions. So testing every single possible case is not something we currently do. So it's human-based QA, testing heavily with new changes and whatnot. We are looking at improving that, looking at not just bugs but performance as well. But our testing is pretty high level, our automatic testing at the moment. So.
I mean, I've definitely not seen it used as much as I would like. I think it's really something that we need more of. Most of the automated testing that I've done separately has been on integrations, on data validation, and on development validation. So, for instance, one of the tools that I built at one point was, designers working in the thing, they change a asset name, and it pops up things saying, hey, this asset is referenced in all these other places. Do you want to update that name across those other places? Or do you want to remove it? And if you do, what do you want to do with that? And so a lot of that testing was happening at the development. The automated test kind of stuff was happening in that development time. So it's more on the validation, integration test side. But I definitely think there's a lot more room for it on the gameplay side. It's just not been done as much as I would like. And I think there's definitely a lot of room for it.
It can be very so you can go as deep as you want with how you automate stuff. I mean, if you throw enough people at it, enough automation engineers, problem is it starts to get really expensive to maintain. And every time there's a change or something breaks, all of those automation engineers have to stop and go look at this, and then the whole pipeline gets clogged a bit. So I think you really need to, you have that, how much should we spend on automation, and how much can we afford, or how much can we afford to slow down when things break? So you have to you have a trade-off there.
It always comes down to the usual thing of I wish we had more time spent on tools. It's always the case, right? So the answer is yes, but also more please, but also never enough. But then there's a cost-benefit analysis there too.
There's a maintenance issue as well. You build rigorous tests for the system, and that system evolves over time. You've got to update all the tests to maintain that.
Yeah.
It's a full-time job, that.
Yeah. There's literally, I was speaking of keywords, Mighty Games got acquired by Keywords recently, and they're an entire company dedicated to doing that sort of testing. They did a very bloody good job of it, but that's taken them a long time.
It wasn't me. It was me.
Yeah. But Ben and Matt have been doing that stuff for years, and it's a whole process behind it. There's an entire company dedicated towards doing automated testing, so it's a big investment, So
it's not standard at all.
No.
It's everyone would like it to be standard. Is the short answer. Yeah, I want them to be yes, more, but that's it. So
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. I think we've got time for one short question, maybe. One. Yep. You're close to the mic. Run.
All right, so this is continuing on of the testing question because I'm a bit of a fanatic about it.
Yeah.
So do you think that one of the bigger challenges with writing automated testing around game mechanics or those sort of lower level, not necessarily implementation, but is it around the difficulty in capturing behavior in a shared understanding sense that it makes it easier to write automated tests focused around an outside-in perspective from like expected behavior instead of like, because what I often find is like when you have a lot of test suites and there's a lot of like, oh, we have to go and change all of the tests because we updated implementation and stuff. I normally find that's a symptom of coupling implementation like into your behavior of your system. And do you guys have a lot of experience with that or thoughts on?
I will chat with you after because I think there's a longer answer to that question.
There is.
We're out of time.
I had another question like that I had written down, but then this came up and I was like, oh, hell no.
Okay.
We've actually got time after the panel as well. If you're going to come heckle us and ask questions,
Yeah, I think,
please do. Yeah.
So yes, there is a lot of different architecture challenges with games. There's also the basic, particularly with device stuff. How do you automate a test for that?
Yeah.
You know, how do you automate a test for the drunk, slightly stoned user? So, you know, how do you do that? And so there's a lot of those things that you can't necessarily catch in the way. And so it's a combination of all those elements. But I will want to talk to you after. We just got the little thing saying time.
Yeah.
All good. Thank you so much for that. Yeah.
Yep.
Just before we do head off, could we do a big group photo of everybody here together? Because that'd be awesome.
Everybody
Because it's like it's good to be back. So it's give a bit of a wave as well. And
Yep, give me a second. I will.
Everyone give us a wave. Woo!
Wave!
Yay!
Yay!
Awesome.
Check. I didn't blur that one. No, I got fancy camera. Yay!
Yay!
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.